Happy Thor's Day. Today I want to talk about Thor's family, his wife, his children. So come along for the ride. Now I'm making a decision on how I'm placing the family around Thor's life, or existence, I should say, not life, existence, based on the general appearance or the general demeanour that our thunder god is quite an honourable and straightforward deity. And this has also led to a whole bunch of rabbit holes that I've gone down to today while I've been considering this, such as sort of an animistic era, an Asgardian era, post-Asgardian era, i.e. the modern era, human era, if you like. That's another rabbit hole to go down another time. What I want to focus on is the family. And this is like who Thor has had a relationship with in the sagas and children associated with him. So I want to focus first on Jarnsaxa, who, by the translation of her name, seems to be like iron hacker, and general consensus seems to place her as a Jotnar, as a Jotun. And this is nothing controversial there, other than, Thor's tendency to wander off to Jotunheimer and slay Jotun. But I think that in terms of timeline, or just not necessarily timeline, because timeline isn't something that really measures in a chronological sense that makes sense to us as mortals. It's time is a chronological pace is something that's more of a concept beyond our kenning for I believe, for Asgard, pre-Asgard, Asgard. But I think Jarnsaxa it makes sense. That's the thing I probably want to reach. It makes sense that Jarnsaxa is the first partner or wife of Thor, and that they have two sons, Modi and Magni. I think as well, the other thing that gives this a bit more gravity is it's these that inherit Mjolnir in the new age of Asgard after Ragnarok. Now, Modi is a translation for wrath, and Magni is mighty, which obviously is a name that gets associated with Thor quite often. And incidentally, if you haven't watched it, there's a great TV show on Netflix called Ragnarok, which is like a modern day telling of the sagas that's kind of in the vein of Buffy the Vampire Slayer or even Smallville, with just a Norse slant. And it's a really good series, really interesting. If you don't mind, dubbing or subtitles. And obviously, it's almost like the Magni inherits Mjolnir, and it's slightly different in the show, but yeah. So this is our first sort of family for Thor that I would say he possibly chooses for whatever reasons, and these sons are given a lot of precedence over the second relationship we're going to get to. And obviously don't know what fate Jarnsaxa has, if any, as is, common, very common in the Poetic Edda, even the Prose Edda, the female agents, if you like, don't get as much of the mention as the male counterparts. Everyone will probably know that Thor is married to Sif. And I think, to take a sidestep, it seems that Sif is to be counted amongst the founders of Asgard, because she has a son from a previous relationship before her and Thor are married. And this is the mysterious Ula, which that's a whole other rabbit hole. But I think because of this whole other rabbit hole, and there's some thoughts and theories I have on this that I've not fully looking into myself at this stage. It's just from my work translating the Poetic Edda. It's just led me to some interesting conclusions that I'll get into at some point. But Sif was married before, and this seems to be in this time that, she's perhaps older than Thor. Again, the age thing is it's a really hard dynamic to quantify when talking about gods, because obviously we get stories of a god is born, and on their first night they're killing people or seeking revenge or whatever. And I think this is because as mortals we can't comprehend the way beings like this act, are created, die, or come to pass, because we are tied to a physical world, and what is beyond, I'll always say people have different perspectives, and people always argue about their perspectives, that that's nonsense, or that is nonsense, or no, that one over there is nonsense. And I'm at a point where I'm thinking, I don't think that is nonsense. I think that all those things, and we're the nonsense because we think we can limit, contain, sort of pigeonhole each of these powers to make us feel better about our understanding of it. Because we are the limited beings, so we seek to limit other things, and that these are things that are on a different gauge. So for whatever reason, Sif seems to be not necessarily widowed either, because surely there would be reference to that. Though it's interesting that in Tales, Thor is referred to as Sif's husband, rather than using another term to using his name, which gives her a lot of sort of prestige, a lot of character. Her name has some interesting sort of suggestions to it, which sort of pop up in interesting ways, particularly that lead into and feed Harbard's Song and Lokasenna. But I think if we focus first, before we get to that, on the relationship that's perhaps represented by Thor and Sif, it seems very much that Sif is like the homekeeper and associated with the earth and agriculture. And with Thor's red hair and what that represents, I think Thor and Sif as a dynamic very much represent a working ethic. And I'm leaning to that for a particular reason, because I think they're both individuals, or both dynamics that represent hard work, toiling. Even Thor's traipsing across the Jotunheimer and defending Midgard and everything. It seems very much that they both represent a dynamic of hard work, of hard labour and working. And if you think of them as animistic beings, if Sif represents the harvest, or the coming of the harvest, the growth, which leads into some Vanir territory maybe. We're talking about the golden growth as associated with her hair, like the golden growth of the summer crops standing in the glorious sunshine, and the counter to that, to make the harvest yielding, or better, is as we get to this point in the summer, curiously enough, when it's too hot and we think something needs to break. This is where the thunder god comes in, because we need that thunder to break the pressure and to bring the rain before we bring the crops in. So that creates this really fantastic dynamic of two powers that work together and seem to be almost like a sensible, designed shoe-in with each other. I'm not saying that is the case at all. I think they, there's nothing to suggest there's nothing there that isn't what passes for a loving relationship. After all, they have a daughter. That, like Thor's sons from his previous marriage, or previous relationship, Fludor, translates as strength, and it is relatively suggested with the other sources that she is a Valkyrie. And obviously it's someone who gains the attention of a dwarf called Alvis, that obviously attempts to do the honourable thing by approaching Thor about discussing Fludor's hand in marriage, to which Thor takes objection and tricks Alvis into spending too much time answering Thor's questions until the sun comes up and he's turned to stone, and that courtship, if it is a courtship, is brought to an end. One of the things I have found myself leaning into a lot more recently, especially with recently writing a beginner's guide to the runes, if you like, is that there's a lot of things where we are the lens to the stories that get told, or to the meanings. And this is important, I think, for two reasons. In that, in the Poetic Edda, we've got two instances where it seems Loki seems to get very close, intimately close perhaps, to both Thor and Sif, to cause issue. In the instance with Sif, it's being able to get close enough to her to cut off all her hair without her knowing. And in the other instance where Thor's concerned, it is in the stealing of Mjolnir. And I think with Sif's, the name what her name gets attached to is also one of those things that just supports the idea that these stories, these powers are lenses or mirrors that say more about us than they do about them. Let me explain. In that two words are connected, almost directly to Sif, which are Sifyar and Sifyum. And the Sifyum is probably the easiest one to talk about, in that this is the old Icelandic, the old Norse word for adultery, which obviously Odin, disguised as Halberd, suggests to Thor when they have their argument across the river, and also Loki unloads in front of the Aesir as they are gathered, when he, has a go at everyone in Lokasenna. So there's this direct, on the nose sort of accusation that Sif is associated with adultery. And I think the important thing here is it's reflective on what you choose to decide about how that is, if that has any gravity or not. As far as I can tell, and this also led to me doing some cutting ahead of some of the translation work I'm doing to just get to the section where Loki and Sif interact in Lokasenna, to translate it for myself, just to see if I could see anything different. And I'm still deciding about that. I think that's something I'll just keep to myself at the moment. But it got me thinking, in that Sifyum is adultery, and then there's Sifyar, which is a familial affinity, i.e. to be connected to someone by family before you marry them. And this again is something that leads to the speculation of whoever Sif's first husband was, that with her marriage to Thor, that they are already have a familial affinity, which may make things a bit awkward. I don't know. Again, it is something that seems to be a lens or a mirror that reflects on us, how we choose to engage with that. That's also got me thinking to okay, so if we apply this almost positive and negative affinity to Sif, let's do the same to Thor. Well, what is that? And I think that's probably restrained rage and unleashed rage. You know, as the defender of Midgard, his this strength, that's restrained and is looking to do what is sensible and counter threats. And then there's this other side, the thunder, if you like, which is the unreleased rage that is the hammer that comes down on all those who are foolish to get in the way. You know, without wanting to, or I should say, rather wanting to keep this focused on Thor, it's led me to this conclusion about Loki, that, you know, Loki is a force of change. There's a positive force of change and a negative force of change. And the positive force of change is like evolution, you know, understanding and advancing things for the better of everyone, which is offset by corruption, which I think, sadly, this is where, you know, Loki falls into. Loki is, you know, corruption. It's like a lack of, that is creating change without any moral purpose, whereas evolution is, you know, creating change with moral fortitude. You know, corruption is a lack of morals, and you think, you know, this also leads into, you know, the dynamic between the three beings, Sif, Thor, and Loki. They are quite sort of entwined with each other. And I think where that has left me is the whole incident between Loki and Sif. Again, there's the positive and the negative. The positive is to be naive about it, and that perhaps Sif offered shelter to Loki while Thor was away. Whatever that turns out to be, get your mind out of the gutter. It doesn't have to be something that is cynical. It just means they was in proximity, and going back to the hard working ethic, you know, you can possibly believe, again, this is a mirror how it reflects on us, that, you know, with Thor and Sif being hard workers, they're dog tired, and when they sleep, they're dead to the world. You know, they're out for the count. And if Loki is in the proximity, then as a corrupt being, Loki can corrupt. You know, the cutting of the hair is not a nice thing. And justifiably, Thor is angry and threatens Loki. You know, this the rage threatening to be unleashed. And obviously creates rumour, scandal, questioning, and we're left with the idea, it's just like, has Sif done anything wrong? Corrupting Sif would have been Loki's goal. I think the acknowledgement of spouting this during the events of Lokasenna is almost, that's a narcissist sort of bitching about someone perhaps having better morals than them, and playing on the rumour that they've probably fostered or been able to foster because of the suggestion around it. We see this in modern times, really. We're all easy to jump to conclusions without knowing the truth. And this brings me around really to, I think, what Thor himself represents. It's that, like with finding out that the Asir have gone to war with the Vanir, the fury of Thor, because why are people breaking oaths? Why are people acting without honor? It's unforgivable. It will not stand. It does not stand. And his arrival in Locasenna is almost the same. It's that, why are you spewing this filth? I'm gonna crush you, Loki. And Loki's like, yeah, I've crossed the line and I'm gonna run away. Thor is someone, ironically, when you think of what he does to Elvis, favours, honest speak. I think there's everything about the dynamic between Thor and Sif is they're all about honest work, honest labour. That it's not something to shy away from, and that there's something beautiful to be found in keeping things simple, and maybe making your decisions based on what you know is true rather than what corrupting voices or powers might be suggesting to you. There's some interesting family dynamics. But yeah, that is the family of Thor. I mean, it's quite straightforward with this side inversion of Loki. Have a think about it. Tell me what you think if you want to, if I haven't rambled on long enough. Thank you very much for listening. Do take care. I'll see you soon. Hail to the God of Thunder.